I was going to say the amount, it's 1.8 million, looks like you're planning to spend less versus last year. What's the amount coming in? In other words, are we going to have to dip somewhat into rainy day funds or what?
Well, let's talk about this chart for a moment, because this does highlight the revenues and the expenses coming in. And to kind of highlight the difficulty that we work in, prior to 3 weeks ago, I was operating off an LSA number of the circuit breaker being about $8.7 million. Then we hired Umball and Associates. Several taxing units in Allen County hired Umball and Associates, and those numbers came in about 3 weeks ago. And that number ended up being the $9.1 million. And I chose to use the more conservative number in the budget process, when in fact, we don't actually know what the circuit breaker is going to be. So the only thing I was happy about is the LSA numbers and the Umball numbers were fairly close when you're talking about millions of dollars, and the 8.3 and the 9.1. So what actually will come down, we'll know more in 2010. One of the difficulties of putting this budget together is the mistiming of the information available with the timing of the preparation of the budget. So we do the best we can, and quite frankly, I think the city has done a pretty darn good job of getting those numbers together.
Where are the savings coming from? Just some examples of the 1.8 million.
Well, one of the, we've had a couple departments, actually I think there might be up to 3 now, that are not appropriating the full head count. You know, people come and go, and there's some dollars in there that, because of transition, you don't spend. So we've kind of made sure that the dollars in those transitions aren't budgeted, so we have fewer dollars in wages. We have some services, some of the supplies. It really was kind of all over the board at 100. I mean, when you think of $132 million and trying to find 1.8, it's a lot of things.
I think the bottom line is that we did ask our departments to really do more with less. So we did have less office supplies asked for. Well, they came back and said they could make their vehicles last longer. I mean, you know, office equipment lasts longer. So many of the things that we would normally set aside to purchase this year or to set aside money for, they went ahead and took the initiative to say we can make this last a little bit longer, and that's again a tremendous statement.
And one other item that is key, quite frankly, is there were. Oh, sorry. One of the things that we were able to take advantage of is there were some changes down at the State House as it relates to pension funds. And police and fire, because of the change of the state taking over the liability for the fire and police pension funds, there were dollars available in those funds to be used. The state code did allow us to use the remaining cash sitting in those funds for retiree health care. We did request from the fire pension board and from the police pension board to allocate $500,000 each to offset those retiree costs. So that also was something available to us. There's approximately $4 million, $2 million each in those funds, and we're using $500,000 each. So it was prudent not to have that cash just sitting there, but to help us through these difficult times.
So that's more than half of the 1.8 million savings is that taking money that you're saying that was in these pension funds and applying that toward retiree.
But that, you know, that is again, there's $4 million. We use it for you know, if we take out $1 million a year, that's only going to help us for a little while here. That's not sustainable. So we'll have to come up with other methods.
How many less jobs? You talked about the natural attrition. You eliminated some jobs. How many we're talking about?
There's 5 fewer jobs in this budget than there was last year. And if you look over in this chart over here, this is another important chart, I believe, because it shows you how much our city has grown in 10 years, and yet we have been able to maintain the level of services our community has grown to expect and deserve, and the head count in which we're able to do that. This speaks to the efficiencies of our city. This speaks to technology in our city. There's a lot of things that are going on that is driving down that head count.
And Pat, you touched on it, but using the million from rainy day and the million from pension, how, in the future, how will the city be able to sustain this level of spending if you think it will be?
Well, we'll have to see, actually, we'll have to see if we need the rainy day fund. You know, that really was just a number because I was using 8.3 coming out of LSA. And again, we don't know if it's going to be 8.3, is it going to be 9.1? What we know is it's going to be in that vicinity somewhere. And another change at the State House happened in 2003 with the way they forecast the income tax dollars. They used to forecast in some modeling mechanism, but now what they do is they actually go to the tax returns and distribute what has been received. And we're about, in 2009, we're receiving 2007 tax return dollars. What we receive in the beginning of 2009, about January, February timeline, is the residual of the COIT and the CEDAT from processed tax returns that were either late, amended, whatever. It's kind of a settlement process. And that number was about $800,000 that we received in January. So in my opinion, the dollars we receive, putting it into a rainy day fund is somewhat of a misnomer, although that is the mechanism, the infrastructure to use, when in fact it's additional dollars you would have received had everything come in on time and correct.
As far as we're concerned, we have a fiduciary responsibility to the citizens of Fort Wayne to have at least some type of rainy day fund in place. We are hit from time to time with catastrophic events, which puts us in a very vulnerable position financially. Our ice storm of last winter is a good example. If we had not had some money in place, and incidentally that cost well over $1 million for cleanup. Now granted, we were able to get some money from other sources, but if we didn't have any money at all in place, that would have put a tremendous financial burden on the citizens of Fort Wayne and on this administration to pull money from other areas and as a result take away from services in those areas to handle that particular event. So having some type of rainy day fund in place, to me, is all part of fiduciary responsibility, not only at the city level, but the county should have one and the state should have one. We have to have something in place, not unlike all of us have maybe a personal savings account or something to fall back on when hard times hit.
What is the amount in the rainy day fund again?
We have, between CEDAT and COIT, we have about $4 million. But again, going back to the estimates and the assessed value, we are in unprecedented times to understand what assessed values are doing, what is the circuit breaker doing. There are so many economic issues that factored into this budget in trying to come up with what did we think the assessed value would be, and to understand the assessed value and to understand how the circuit breaker is going to impact that. It's just not an easy job and gets more difficult every year, especially when you have a crash in the 2008 that we did in the housing market.
And you're looking at 2011, that it's going to be even harder to...
I think 2011, I predicted 2010 to be difficult. I think 2011 is going to be difficult. But I have kind of gotten to the point where trying to project too far out is more of a guess. And so I'm trying to project out to 2012, and that's about as far as I can project at this point. Because you are constantly at risk of legislative changes. I mean, there's just so many changes that are going on.
What would the 5 employees you mentioned that are the head count dropping by 5? Is that what I thought I heard you say? But what does that equate to in terms of dollars? What do you figure one person with benefits and wages and generally comes out to?
Well, I would estimate, what, about $65,000 per employee?
Yeah.
That would be pay and benefits.
Yeah.
Yeah, so 300,000, between 300,000 and 400,000. Any other questions? If not, I'm sure Pat and myself will both be available for private interviews. So again, thank you.